INCREDULOUS, Chapter 1. The strange newness of a once familiar world. Quote, This message was for the ears of man alone, they who walk between the worlds of earth and heaven. End quote. Excerpt from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, November 2nd, 2011. Torrential rains brought about by an oncoming hurricane had been punishing the dangerous, muddy jungle roads all day. The bone-jarring 7-hour ride by military transport to the mountain village was brutal. Joshua had taken part in dozens of exorcisms over the past year, but nothing like this. The church never went to these lengths for anyone. If anything, it seemed to ignore the flock's plea for help. The church's official stance on demons was that they did not exist in this day and age, which is why Joshua was surprised to see so many exorcists assigned to one case. With so many demonic outbreaks lately, exorcists had been spread rather thinly. Why were so many priests involved in this exorcism, and why the urgency? Artemis had been Joshua's closest friend and instructor for the past year, ever since Joshua had decided to make exorcism his profession. After only 6 months at his new assignment, Joshua had started wondering if this was what he wanted to do for the remainder of his life. Having grown up in a haunted house, he understood the dire urgency and need for exorcists. He did not believe in the lengthy process of going through proper channels if a Christian family was pleading for help. Joshua quickly became a problem for the archdiocese. When offered the chance to become a full-time exorcist, he had jumped at the opportunity. Joshua knew of no official listing of exorcists. The men he met were usually engaged in active ministry, and few held postgraduate degrees. It was rare to find an exorcist who was a recently ordained priest. Their median age ranged between 45 and 65. At 31, Joshua stood out from the older men, and although a muscular, athletic physique was not a characteristic of the run-of-the-mill exorcist, it could certainly come in handy should it possess individual pelts. As a rule, exorcists were not the scholarly type. After years of aloofness, most were lacking in social skills. For the most part, exorcists did not possess a vivid imagination, a valuable asset, thought Joshua. After growing up afraid of the dark, he could easily generate images of unmitigated horror. Having joined the Marine Corps at 18, Joshua had been around seasoned combatants most of his life, men who, like the exorcist, knew their enemy and were no strangers to death. The church chose its exorcists carefully. The qualities it looked for in a priest were soundness of mind and strong personal faith. A candidate's judgment and personal behavior had to remain rational under adverse and chaotic conditions. To the best of Joshua's knowledge, none had ever undergone post-exorcism psychiatric evaluations to prepare them for the skepticism they would meet in the outside world and within the Vatican. There is not much written about possessions or the devil in the ancient Hebrew scriptures we call the Old Testament. In the New Testament, however, exorcism seems to be a standard operating procedure for Jesus and his disciples. Archbishop, would you please brief these men, said Artemis, startling Joshua back to reality. Artemis had been an exorcist now for 31 years and had never told Joshua much about his personal past. Joshua wasn't sure how old Father Artemis was. His hair was almost completely white, and he was about Joshua's height, 5 feet 10 inches. Joshua had never seen Artemis so silent and secretive before. He'd been trying to goad him into revealing something about their latest mission. Usually, Father Artemis would give everyone involved an in-depth briefing on who was possessed, how it happened, and the demon's name if it was known. What is the bishop, especially one who is not a spiritual man, doing at an exorcism? Wondered Joshua. These men will be forming my team, announced Artemis, and I will need them to know what we are up against. You can start with the circumstances of the haunting and take them through to the possession. I'll finish up with what information I feel they should know about the demon Asmodeus. Do you think that is wise, Artemis? Asked the balding, heavy-set Jesuit priest. The only thing denoting his rank was the amethyst bishop's ring and purple shirt with the traditional black cassock. Normally, he would be sporting a purple cincture around his waist. The Vatican was very explicit, Artemis, as few people as possible need to know all the details of this operation. Archbishop, I doubt that you have ever been involved with an exorcism. The lives of these men will be in danger. This is no poltergeist we're dealing with. Artemis is no ordinary demon. He is a prince amongst demons, making him more powerful than thrones, dominions, and powers. And that is something none of these men have ever been up against. So either you tell them, or I will. At the repeated sound of the word demon, the soldier, wrestling with the wheel of the transport, convulsed ever so slightly. He crossed himself, making the sign of the cross over his forehead, torso, and shoulders. I will never understand why most Catholics in this part of the world tend to cross themselves so often. It gets annoying after a while, thought Joshua. Archbishop Felipe Espanola considered for a moment and then spoke. As things stand now, the demon leaves the possessed alone until nightfall. The possessed is a young girl named Isenia. She is 14 and the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter, if that means anything. The demon first took control of the girl's grandmother, a curandera, someone who is well versed in herb remedies and heals by the laying on of hands. Although the word curandera literally means healer, many in the village consider the woman to be a witch or bruja, someone who heals by the laying of hands. It hardly sounds like a witch, challenged Joshua. Curanderos are well known for placing curses on people practicing black magic or brujeria, countered the archbishop. About 2 months ago, thumping noises were heard in the grandmother's room by the girl and her grandmother. After that, pictures of Christ on the wall shook, and clawing or scratching sounds were heard around the floorboards and on the roof. In the morning, objects would be found positioned in peculiar ways throughout the house. At first, Padre Antonio Gutierrez, the priest who makes the rounds of this remote village, did not concern himself with the stories of the haunting, since the curandera did not attend regular mass or consider herself subject to the church's authority. As a favor to the family, Padre Antonio stayed in their home while visiting the village. By this time, the grandmother, Guadalupe, was said to be possessed. Antonio noticed nothing unusual about the woman during the day. That night, he was awakened by screams. Horrified, he made his way toward the grandmother's room, where he witnessed three men in the process of restraining the woman, who seemed to possess tremendous strength. She had been bound to the bedpost to prevent her from scratching her face off. According to Padre Antonio, Guadalupe's eyes seemed enormous, an obvious sign of possession, commented the archbishop in an attempt to impress the group. Also, the area under the eyes was incredibly dark, and her tongue was protruding about 12 inches. That's always a dead giveaway, the tongue hanging out like that, remarked Joshua from the front seat, to the laughter of everyone but the archbishop, who was not amused. Padre Antonio also reported a commotion outside the house, continued the archbishop. He was told Guadalupe only behaved this way when lechuzas circled over the house, shrieking and whistling. Lechuzas? You mean owls flew around the house whistling? Asked Dr. Facundo Lazo, scratching his granite-colored stubble. Doctors are only required on the most dangerous cases, thought Joshua. He was not sure where the doctor originated from, but his English was excellent. Dr. Lazo, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his mid-40s, who peered through wire-framed glasses, had been waiting with the team of soldiers when Joshua and Artemis arrived at the military base that morning. It was obvious to Joshua that this doctor had never attended an exorcism. No, not owls, doctor. Around here, owls are called tecolotes. These things are as large as full-grown turkeys and have the face of an old woman and not that of a bird. I have seen one up close. It had the long white hair of a woman and stood about a meter in height, added Padre Ricardo, who was accustomed to dealing with these creatures. The padre, a parish priest from Cartagena, Colombia, was no stranger to exorcisms. Padre Ricardo Valencia was in his mid-40s and had been a priest all his adult life. The Vatican had recruited him for his mission at the last minute. It seems none of us have been brought up to date on these cases. Why is the Vatican acting so fast in these cases? The cardinals usually drag their feet when it comes to exorcisms, remarked Padre Ricardo in a heavy Spanish accent. How is it you got such a good look at one of those flying things in the dark? Asked an astonished archbishop. You don't have to see one to know what it looks like. I have seen some myself. I know what he's describing, explained Artemis. The whistle from one of these creatures will cause your skin to crawl and the hair on the back of your neck to stand on end. It is a sound you will never forget. The archbishop continued apprehensively. The church originally refused to grant permission for an exorcism since Guadalupe does not consider herself a Catholic. After a time, things quieted down, and Padre Antonio thought the demon had left. But it soon became apparent that the young girl Isenia had become the demon's new target. It is believed that at some point in the possession, the granddaughter Isenia called the demon into herself in an attempt to save her grandmother. While Isenia was at school, her desk started shuffling around the schoolroom floor on its own, frightening the other children. An exorcism was requested at this point. Once it is authorized, the priest involved continued the Black Fest for 2 weeks, trying to get the demon to identify itself. What relic were the priests using? Asked Joshua. At first they did not have one, nor did they know they could use one. When they called me from the military base at the foot of the mountain, I told them to remove the relic that was under the altar. This is a very old village, and the church altars were originally sanctified with the relic of a saint. This one turned out to be a piece of spinal vertebrae. I do not remember who the saint was, added the archbishop, shrugging his shoulders. An actual bone from the skeleton of a saint? A piece of his body? Asked the doctor, incredulously. Yes, that's why they call it a relic, Doc, explained Joshua. This relic, did it have any effect on the demon? Asked Artemis. Oh, yes, it burned the girl when she was touched with it. They were not expecting this. In the morning, however, there was no sign of a burn on the girl, so they continued using it. After one more week, the demon identified itself as Asmodeus, apparently one of the princes of hell. When I reported this to Cardinal Bishop Pablo de la Torre at the Vatican, he became very interested in the case. Why have they not been able to cast out the demon? And why are so many exorcists assigned to this case?" inquired Pablo Ricardo Valencia. "That's just it. They are no longer trying to exorcise the demon, Padre. Vatican wants this one captured and taken back to Rome for questioning," explained Artemis, to the surprise of everyone in the personal transport. Not long after the Vatican learned of the demon's identity, arrangements were made to have the girl brought to Rome. She has been under careful watch by the exorcist for several days now. "So we're supposed to catch this thing and bring it back with us," deduced Joshua, not certain he understood. "The young girl will play host to the demon. If the winds allow, a military helicopter will arrive tomorrow and fly us to the nearest airport. She is to be heavily sedated for the flight to Rome. Father Artemis and Joshua will accompany her and her father back to Rome under special Vatican guard," announced the Archbishop, convinced his plan would work. "Why doesn't the priest just call the demon into himself? Then you could all go home to Rome and question it at your leisure," asked Joshua with a wry smirk. "Excellent idea, Joshua. Would you like to volunteer?" asked his mentor, Father Artemis. "Hell no," retorted Joshua. "I never volunteered for anything. If I learned nothing else during my tour in the Marine Corps, I learned that much." "Joshua, the Vatican has placed the highest priority on this case," Archbishop Felipe Espindola reminded him. "Your team is here to relieve the entire team of exorcists who have been with the family for nearly a month. The Black Fast has taken its toll on them. I'm not sure how much longer they could have endured this ordeal on a diet of bread and water." Turning to Joshua, he asked, "Have you started your fast yet, young man? And have you been absolved of your sins? This is a very powerful demon we're dealing with." "Yes, 2 days ago, sir, as soon as we were notified." Joshua remembered the old priest's breath coming from the other side of the cloth during confession had a hint of alcohol, probably whiskey, he thought. "Asmodeus, isn't that the same demon associated with Rennes-le-Chateau? I visited the place when I was in France, and I was mystified by that Saunier could have possibly found there. But you know what I found strangest of all? Inside the church were two large ornate statues, one on each side of the altar, one statue of Mother Mary, the other of Saint Joseph. I thought it strange that each of the statues was depicted holding a Christ child." "Joshua, I tell you this as a friend, young man. If you value your career as a priest, I suggest you stop looking for whatever it was Abbe Bernard Saunier found at that infernal place," cautioned the Archbishop. The driver, who only spoke Spanish, informed the bishop that they were almost to the village of El Hormiguero. Due to the heavy rains, there didn't seem to be many villagers around. "The name of this old village, El Hormiguero, means the ant hill or ant infestation," said Dr. Lazo. "I'm glad there aren't any villagers around. They always get on my nerves." "How's that, Doc?" asked Joshua, trying to suppress a smile. "These people, they're always so damn happy. They don't have shit. They're dirt poor. Why in the world should they be so happy? Hell, I drive a Mercedes, and I'm never that damn happy." "The poor still have hope," said Joshua. "They think money will help. The poor never seem to have enough for themselves, yet they somehow always seem to have enough to share with others who have even less," added Artemis, settling the matter. As the military transport stopped in front of the Hospital Santa Rosa's entrance, Dr. Lazo wiped the fog off the small window with the sleeve of his rain jacket. He looked around, then up at the leaden sky. "Shouldn't these people have been evacuated for the oncoming hurricane?" he asked. "Where to? There's no such thing as FEMA in this country, and the people would have nowhere to go if they left," explained Artemis. Noticing Joshua trying to suppress a grin, he asked him to share the joke with the rest of the group. Artemis had discovered long ago that Joshua's mind could come up with the most amusing links to similar events. "I remember seeing Someone wearing a t-shirt at Mardi Gras after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, explained Joshua. It read, FEMA evacuation plan. Run, motherfucker, run. Surprisingly, this village had a hospital, the Santa Rosa, an architectural eyesore. The hospital was located on the edge of a mountain ridge. Other than its barrel-tiled roof, the three-story building had no outstanding features, stood out because it did not blend in with the older buildings around it. A constant breeze from the Gulf of Darien helped to keep the mosquitoes at bay. Santa Rosa had started out as a convent in which 7 nuns ran a small clinic to treat minor ailments. The general population, being poor and uneducated, soon began to strain the clinic's resources. Seeing the opportunity to attract more converts, the archdiocese sanctioned the building as a hospital, although the funding had been meager as hospitals go. The unexpected turnout of many volunteers, mostly young men, allowed the money allocated for labor to be used for equipment and medical supplies instead. The families of these men had wanted to repay the nuns for their kindness. I hate the smell of hospitals. The smell of that yellow stuff they put all over your wounds brings back unwelcome memories, thought Joshua, as he ran into the building that stood next to the hospital. The second truck pulled up, and soldiers began unloading equipment into the old church. Joshua followed them toward a small room in the back, wondering what had been sent in all those waterproof plastic containers. Breaking the seal on one, he opened it and examined its contents. "Joshua, what is all this stuff you're unpacking here?" asked the doctor, motioning towards the equipment stacked against the walls. "I think I figured out why I'm on this team, Doc. I was an electrical equipment repairman in the Marine Corps. They must have figured I would know how to operate all this stuff. This is definitely not a normal exorcism. The cameras are interesting. We have infrared and night vision," said Joshua, almost to himself. "You're awfully young for an exorcist, Joshua," observed Dr. Lazo. "How did you end up an exorcist anyway? No offense, but I think a smart young man like yourself would have higher ambitions." "When I was a child, my experience with the paranormal and supernatural terrified me, Doc. Growing up Roman Catholic, I became fascinated with supernatural. From a very young age, I wanted to become an exorcist, hoping I could help others who were going through what I had experienced." That seemed to satisfy the doctor's curiosity. "You know, Joshua, when I find that some of my patients think they might need an exorcist, I usually direct them to a theologian rather than a psychiatrist. Most psychiatrists consider exorcisms to be religious in nature and based on the medieval supernatural nonsense that has no support in science." "So what do you do with the possessed refuses to believe God even exists, let alone the devil?" asked an incredulous Joshua. "Well, I've only come across a couple of cases, but it was evident that they had suffered some sort of neglect, possibly physical or sexual abuse. Their behavior was bordering on psychotic, multiple personality disorders, that sort of thing." "How would you account for the freezing temperatures often associated with paranormal events?" asked Joshua. "A figment of the imagination, I suppose?" "Doc, please don't tell me you presume that human memory is not reliable, and so the exorcist only thinks he witnessed floating beds, jumping tables, growing black apparitions, and flaming candles. You have seen all these things?" asked the doctor, astonished at Joshua's sincerity. "I sure have, and with any luck tonight I might even get to videotape them," said Joshua as he unpacked the last crate. "You will be videotaping?" asked Antonio as he entered the room. "Padre, you look like hell," blurted out the doctor. "Are you all right?" "A month-long black fast will do this to you, senor," said the old village priest, shaking the doctor's hand and adding, "I am Padre Antonio Gutierrez. I have been leading this exorcism since it began." Padre Antonio, I'm Dr. Lazo. I'll be the attending physician. I'm Joshua, and I guess I'm supposed to set this stuff up, said Joshua, monitoring toward the camera mounts with the cordless drill in his hand. Yes, you're supposed to mount some cameras on the walls. Do not worry about removing them. I will have someone else do that when you are gone, explained Padre Antonio. Joshua, I have never attended one of these events before. What can I expect? Asked the doctor. Well, you're in for a treat, Doc, because I have never seen anything like this. I've been instructed to record what transpires during the exorcism, or whatever it is we are supposed to be doing tonight. But I find the use of video recording equipment and infrared cameras a bit odd. Normally, no recording of exorcisms is ever kept. I have never been allowed to take any video recordings before. This is by no means a normal exorcism. We have far more priests than necessary. Isn't that a good thing? With more exorcists, you should stand a better chance, shouldn't you? Reasoned the doctor. A formal church sanctioned exorcism requires only one priest and a junior colleague. The priests involved are usually appointed by diocesan authorities. There is no official training program to become an exorcist, so the junior colleagues usually attend for their own training. During this particular exorcism, I will be the only junior colleague. The rest of the exorcists are seasoned veterans. The number of assistants usually depends on how much violence is expected. 4 is usually the right number. We are using 6, not including you. But do not deceive yourself into thinking there is safety in numbers. As a junior colleague, my job will be to monitor the words and actions of the exorcist in charge, and warn him if I feel he is making a mistake. Since there are many of us, we will help him if he weakens and replace him if he collapses or flees in horror, Joshua said with a laugh. We will also replace him if he becomes physically or emotionally battered beyond endurance, or dies, or all of which have happened during exorcisms, he added in a more somber tone. Once an exorcism has begun, there are no timeouts except on the rarest occasions. Then again, we are not trying to expel this demon, are we? Before performing any exorcism, everyone involved must make a good confession and be absolved of all sins that the demon may try to use against them. I usually prepare by spending my time alone in prayer, fasting, and meditating. In preparation for an exorcism, priests are usually required to undergo the black fast. During this time, they eat only small amounts of bread and drink only water. The black fast is one of the most physically demanding rites in the church. It will take its toll on you if the exorcism is lengthy, as it did on Padre Antonio's case. Doc, it is very important that you also perform confession. Anything you're hiding in the closet will be used as a weapon. Like the exorcist, you must be able to endure horrible personal insults and be prepared to have your dark secrets screeched before all those assembled. What happens routinely That happens routinely during exorcisms. How should I dress? What should I wear? Asked the doctor. You're fine just the way you are, Doc. The only people who need to wear special attire are the exorcist and the assistant priest. Each of us will wear a long black cassock that covers the length of the bodies. Over this will be a waist-length white surplice. A narrow purple shawl will be worn around the necks, hanging loosely about the length of the torso, Joshua said as he stepped from the small room containing the electronic equipment into the main church, followed by the reluctant companion. Father Artemis wants the exorcism held in the church because of the recent paranormal outbreaks, continued Joshua, his arms outstretched. Because we are using the church for this exorcism, the holy wafers are to be removed to prevent possible sacrilege. The room where the exorcism will be conducted must be cleared of anything that can be moved. Any religious iconography, that's not anchored in place needs to go. Objects such as pictures, tables, and chairs tend to fly around the room. During exorcisms, even large objects can move about, rock back and forth, or skitter across the floor. These have been known to strike the exorcist, his assistants, or the possessed. All that sort of stuff will have to be removed. I have witnessed wallpaper peeling off walls. Sometimes there are strange rumblings, scratching sounds, hisses, and other noises that have no apparent source. Walls and furniture have cracked. Often the temperature of a room containing the possessed drops dramatically. At times, an accurate and distinct stench accompanies the possessed. I once tried wearing a gas mask. It didn't help. It is also quite common to emerge from an exorcism with serious physical injuries. For that reason, we are required to have a medical doctor among the team members. "What are you talking about here? Bruises? Carpet burns?" asked the doctor. Joshua laughed at the thought of carpet burns. Running a hand over his left sleeve, he said, "Once, during an exorcism, the sleeves of Father Artemis, black Cossack, kept bursting into flames. At one point his purple stole slid off from around his neck and began thrashing on the floor like a wounded snake." "Could the flames have been an illusion or a hallucination?" asked the doctor, intrigued. If they were hallucinations, the smoke alarm must have been hallucinating as well. When it went off, I just about jumped out of my skin. After the ordeal, I examined the cassock and found it to be severely scorched." Gesturing toward the two large wooden doors at the entrance, Joshua continued, "Doors will be open and shut uncontrollably, but because exorcisms can go on for days, doors cannot be nailed shut, and few exorcists wish to be locked in a room with a demon. On the other hand, the doorway must be kept covered, otherwise the physical forces released from within the room could affect individuals in the immediate vicinity. Windows must be closed securely. Sometimes they can be boarded over in order to keep flying objects from crashing through them. For some diabolic reasons, the possessed seem to take great pleasure in hurling priests through closed windows. Luckily, this old church does not seem to have any windows that we need to worry about. Normally, a bed or couch is left in the room, and that is where the possessed person is placed. In this case, we are using a hospital stretcher, complete with restraints and wheels locked in the raised position," said Joshua, tugging on the stretcher's heavy leather restraints. The stretcher had been placed on the top of the pews where it would serve as a makeshift bed. A small table is usually needed. On it is placed a crucifix with one candle on either side, as well as holy water and a prayer book. For this purpose, a wooden box had been placed on one of the pews supporting the stretcher. Although we will carry a saint's relic, we will more than likely not be using it. Padre Ricardo has placed a large picture of the Virgen de Guadalupe on the box. He has probably learned that the possessed considers this image especially significant. And finally, once we've prepared the room, Father Artemis will enter last and alone. "Assistants are given three cardinal rules, Doc," cautioned Joshua, holding up three fingers and counting them off. "They are to obey the exorcist's commands immediately and without question, no matter how absurd or unsympathetic they may seem to be. They are not to take any initiative, and they are never, ever to speak to the possessed person. I trust that you, being a doctor, will not grow pale at the sight of blood, excrement, or urine, and remember to be prepared for obscene behavior or foul language beyond your wildest imaginings." "Are all exorcisms this grueling?" asked Dr. Lawson. Joshua looked about to see if who might be within hearing distance before answering. "And no, they are not," he said in a hushed tone. "And I've gotten myself in a lot of trouble for performing several unsanctioned exorcisms in the past. When Jesus sent his disciples out, They never had to request written permission from the high priest in order to perform an exorcism. So I don't see why I need the permission, the Pope's permission. The way I see it, if he no play the game, he no make the rules. Elements, earth or natural spirits, are probably the easiest to deal with, continued Joshua in a slightly louder voice. Then you have your disembodied spirit, restless souls really. These are followed by more specialized evil spirits, lust, anger, that sort of thing. And finally, you have the demons, the most unruly and by far the hardest to deal with. Joshua pulled out his iPhone and began fidgeting with it. You can get signal up here, asked the doctor. No, Doc, I'm activating the electromagnetic field meter application, explained Joshua. This gadget is nowhere near as sensitive as my real EMF meter, but it doesn't have to be because the entities we deal with are usually very powerful. What I like about this application is that it allows me to record the event. Joshua held up a second device about the size of a carton of cigarettes. This is our primary EMF meter. It is far more sensitive in detecting electromagnetic fields and can detect any change in the room. A remote sensor connects at the base, much like a microphone. The top half is made of red plastic and lights up with an accompanying beep to alert the user when a change occurs. Because the constant beeping would interfere with the exorcism, I modified the device to beep only once, while the red light remains on during the entire time the signal is picked up. You know how to modify electronics? Asked Padre Ricardo, who had overheard the conversation. I know how to build them, beamed Joshua, having installed the last camera. Joshua, it is getting late, cautioned Padre Ricardo, examining his watch. Hefting a large statue from its nook in the thick adobe walls, he added, "You will need to finish up positioning the equipment before we begin." "Yes, sir," replied Joshua, returning to the equipment in the small room. He added, "If you'll excuse me, Doc, I forgot how late it was. I still have to test the visual on the infrared and UV cameras. I have no idea how the full range spectrometer works," he added, examining the controls on its surface panel. "Yes, of course. Thank you, Joshua. You have been very informative. I'll make sure I am prepared on my end," said the doctor. "Is this where I should confess?" he asked, pointing toward a narrow desk at the ledge at the bottom of a, for kneeling. No, that's the Pierre Beer. It's what the priest kneels on to offer his private devotions before saying Mass, explained Joshua. "For confession, you should use one of the two booths near the main entrance. A priest is required to absolve you of your sins."